All right. So the next part of this, and I'm sorry if that looked a little weird. We had to make a cut. My computer ran out of memory. The next part of the guide here really moves into specific parliamentary elements of a policy debate. So we're not going to cover all of this. I just point out that it just points out you should take very detailed notes while you're listening to the other side talk. And in parliamentary debate, which again we're not able to do because of being online, but normally this would be really rapid fire. So at least take away from this that you should outline your opponent's argument as you watch their video, and that way you will have a better chance of hitting all their points as you counter it. And to do that, you'll see here the next item is refutations. Now, for this, there's a couple different ways you can approach using a refutation for a policy debate. One is to single out one element and then challenge it on some level. It doesn't have to say that everything is wrong. You can just say, I don't know about this. That didn't seem right to me. And then appeal to the senses of the audience, because someone out there probably feels the same way you do, or maybe they will feel that way after you say it, whether you really do or not. Another way to refute is just a complete refutation, to simply say that their argument is wrong, that their statement that something is a problem is flawed because it's not a problem, to sort of just like wholesale reject their premise and push it back to them. The next one is to challenge the accuracy of some piece of information. Again, this is planting those seeds of doubt. So, again, you may not know for certain if something is accurate or not, but you could bring it up as something that sounds suspect. Or if you know that something is inaccurate, call that out for certain. And then last, ask about the motivation. Like, why are certain things brought up? Maybe there's something that just seems to be a non sequitur. It doesn't follow in the natural logic of the argument. So why did they bring it up? Is it to distract? Is it to lie, mislead? What's their motivation? Again, I'm not saying that you should villainize your opponent. In fact, you should not. You should always state that you're sure the opponent has the best interests in mind, but they may be mistaken. So it's sort of that really friendly way to call someone out and insult them basically without them feeling insulted. The audience will pick it up. Similar to refutations, you've got critiques. You can move through this, but this is in essence for our use going to just shift parts of the original argument. Maybe one side said that we should, I don't know, start an ad campaign, and you think that that's not the best way to go, and you want to say that we should start a class that's required at Grand Valley to teach something as an alternative plan. Now, this is tricky too. So what's the temptation is for you to hear an argument, tweak it basically, and then say it's your own. And there are times if there's an obvious flaw in the original argument that might work, that the audience or the judges, whoever, will see that and say, yeah, that was definitely a flaw. I'm glad they pointed that out. They win. Other times though, it can seem like you're cheating or you're being sort of cheap. You're not really putting in the effort. You just picked something small and tweaked it, that because you didn't want to do any work. And if you run into a judge or an audience that feels that way, you sort of shot yourself in the foot. You're not going to be very successful at winning the debate. Next up, the term here that we should know is disadvantages. So this is basically only for a policy debate. If you use a problem solution constructive argument, then that should really include that plan that we talked about and the evaluation of it with pros and cons. So the opposition should highlight those disadvantages as stated by the government. So if I tell you, here's the weakness with my plan, well, then you want to exploit that. Now, similarly, if the negative case on the negative side on the constructive case says something like, actually, well, this one's about parking at Grand Valley. So If they say there isn't a parking problem at Grand Valley, there's a walking problem at Grand Valley. Students don't want to walk to their classes from their parking lot. And that doesn't mean that we need more parking. It just means that we have students who are not motivated. Okay, great. Let's say that's your point. Then you need to give us a plan then to motivate students, because the problem, you have identified a problem. You said it. There's a walking problem, not a parking problem. So how are you going to fix that? So just because you're on the negative side does not mean that you won't need a plan for the most part. So for this, definitely go back and highlight what they said was weak. If there are strengths that they identified that you can relabel as disadvantages, do that. And then, really think about how you might take that on. So here, the benefits of, let's say this was for building a parking garage, as you see, more parking benefit, covered parking for wintertime, lighting and safety, yes, costs and disadvantages. There may be some, like money. It's going to cost us some money. So the other side might say, yeah, okay, well, we're going to have more parking, but we already know that tuition is too high, parking passes are too high. It is going to cost money, and it's going to cost a lot of money. So we're exploiting their listed disadvantage. Then we don't need more parking, we have enough. This plan won't solve the problem with walking. Covered parking is nice, but is it worth the 5 minutes that it would take to clean off your car? And the safety and lighting, that's nice, but we don't need a garage to do that. We can put up new lights. They don't need to be inside of a new parking garage. So again, you're really taking their argument, outlining it as you listen. That way you can go back and hit every single point. Next up, I guess really last with this, is counter arguments, which are again associated with policy debates. This is when it's really another way to call this other stuff. I mean, we talked about disadvantages and refutations, but the counter argument is to say that the opposing side's argument was flawed and you have a better remedy. And so that is your counter argument. So that goes back to this parking problem. But you still, again, need to get some solution. So for this plan, it's not listed here, but if we have a walking problem, and so people want to build a parking garage, it would probably be much less expensive and just as effective if we did things like, started an on-campus shuttle service that went from different parking lots to different buildings. That would be an alternative, and then it would have most of the same benefits. It would be safer because you wouldn't be walking in the elements as far or at night in the dark. It would be, let's see, what were the advantages here that they listed? Covered parking would not really matter. It would be much less expensive. So really the only one would be the covered parking that you wouldn't get. But then you go right back up and say, is it worth it that it takes, here it is, 5 minutes to clean your car? Do you really want to pay millions of dollars for a new building? So with that, let's see what else we've got. That's the end of that chapter 13. Now, before we end the video, let's jump back up and look at different ways that you might structure your argument. Now, we know that the stock issues are listed and that's really the way you'll want to structure it with, you're identifying the problem, who's to blame for it, how to fix it, and then the cost benefit. So one chapter here, chapter 10, it talks about Monroe's motivated sequence. And we skipped this earlier because it just wasn't needed, but this is a great way to sort of check yourself and make sure that you are hitting all those points. Now, Monroe's doesn't include blaming anyone for a problem, but they do, if you'll look here, talk about need, satisfaction, and visualization. And that is the problem, the solution, and then the cost benefit analysis. And what it adds is this attention step. And everyone needs an attention step. I know you're given a debate topic and, it seems pretty obvious that we're all engaged because we have to be. We're a captive audience in terms of being in the class. But remember, the idea here is that you want to make the audience want to listen to you. So tell them how it affects them. Give them a statistic. Give them a story, something. If you go back and watch the videos that I have made about the value debates already, you'll see that I do that with mine. And that's not a just a fluke or something I like to do, but this is something that we know from research it works. Um, you can go through and look at the different steps. I don't want to go into too much detail because I don't want to confuse this with stock issues. But remember, here in the attention getter, there's different ways to get attention: facts, statistics, humor, quotations, questions, etc. We talked about this with the persuasion chapter, so go back and watch that video. Here are some more questions in the need or problem section that you might ask yourself about your own identification of a problem when you are going through the stock issues for policy. And then hit these as well. What are the negative effects? Who's impacted? How severe is it? Do some people think it's not a problem? How can you convince them that it is? Same thing with solution, or the cure, ill blame cure. Here is some other items to consider. Ask yourself if your plan is broad enough to really solve the problem. Does it need multiple steps to hit multiple plans, or just multiple steps for a single plan? Make sure, this is important, that your plan is reasonable and it can be accomplished. It's not just sort of, the pie in the sky. One of the debate I've seen in the past in class was talking about what do we do with our garbage. We need to recycle more. And one person said, no, we don't. We just need to get our garbage literally off of our planet. And they wanted to launch it into space on rockets. And at first, it seems like, wow, that's not a terrible idea. I mean, what do we care? We don't go to space as basic people. Um, but then the opponent pointed out that it costs so much money to launch something into space. You add tons of garbage to that, and it's not going to be feasible. So again, think about your plan being doable. Then go through those benefits. You see those there. And then Monroe's also includes a call to action. And this is not a bad step if you want to include it, though it's not required in your in-class debates. However, if you are debating either with friends, again, about something as simple as what are we going to do tonight, all the way to something in the work setting or something similar, you should use a call to action. Give them sort of the first step to your plan as a way to get things started. And that comes across to the audience as not only you don't like what's going on, but you've told us how it could be better. And now you're letting us you're leading the way to show us what we need to do. And you can again look through this, but what I'll point out here is that Monroe's motivated sequence is used in most of the 1-800 commercials, like the call now stuff. The ASPCA commercial, almost purely Monroe's. We may have seen that previously in the persuasion chapter, but these things, it works. That setup works. So it's not too far off from what you will use. Now, if you want an outline to use, here is one that you can. It will touch on most of the things that you need. You might add or take away some of these. So I don't really know that you need an exact, central idea statement built in. It may sort of come naturally with your debate, but this could show you how to make your points here. So this would actually need to be expanded so that it would be whatever you deem to be the problem, the blame, and then main point 3 would be the solution. Main point 4 would be the cost benefit analysis. And then of course you'll want a nice conclusion, just as you will want a nice attention getter where you preview those main points. That's one thing that I pointed out on quite a few of the value debates, is that it really strengthens at least maybe your argument, but really the appearance of your argument when you are able to start out with letting the audience know what you're going to do. So I've got 3 main points, this, and this, and really nail those down and then follow through. So here's a decent outline that you can use. Now, if you want to do something a little different, sorry, this is all spaced strangely, but the Aristotelian argument isn't too far off either. So this would just be sort of the same thing with an attention getter, the background, or basically, if you look at it, the problem, because it's how did we end up here? So what are we doing wrong? What is the problem? And then your proposition, or what we should do, we call that the plan, right? The solution. And then concessions and justifications would be your cost benefit analysis. So, what are you admitting is a weakness? Those are concessions. And then, can you justify with benefits or offset the concessions, the negatives with benefits in a way that's clear to your audience that the benefits outweigh the costs? And then again, a clear conclusion, very important. And you can look at some examples of this that I've provided here, and that will show you, I hope, how that might flow. And again, the lettering got sort of messed up here. So you can follow along with that fairly easily. There's a couple listed. And then last but not least, the Toulmin model is, again, not exactly what we're looking for with ill blame, cure, cost, benefit, but it gives you a way to make your points and to do it very clearly. Let me just bump this down so we can see these all together. So you've got the claim, what you're in favor of, the facts, statistics, observation, warrant, backing, rebuttal, qualifier, refined claim. The big takeaway here is that you're going to tell us what you think should happen. Then you're going to back that up with some, again, you can't look up sources, but some facts, observations, things that make us believe you know what you're talking about. Then the logical connection between your facts and your argument. Then that's called the warrant. Then support it, like why it would be a good idea. The counter argument that other people you know will throw at you. Go ahead and bring it up and then knock it down. Give us a qualifier, meaning tell us when something might not work according to your plan, but how you're going to then control for that. And then what you can do is refine the claim. So you'll start with this broad claim that's what you're in favor of, and then at the end you'll have this very precise, specific claim. Now this is probably the least useful of the three in terms of policy debate, but the reason I include it here is to remind you that there are different ways to make your point. So this is really more within a single point, like the plan and why that would work. So this would be you adding credence, credibility, thought, logic to your plan that you're offering so that it makes it harder for the other side to come back and say, that's not a very good plan. Well, if you show us how well it's thought out, it's going to be tough for the other side to make a strong argument against you. We'll go through just the one here, but the way I want you to read this, I've added these words in that are bold and caps so that you can see how things would flow. So I believe that the U.S. government should ban animal testing because millions of animals are killed and cosmetic companies are using this and they don't make life-saving products. That means that this massive loss of life is purely for vanity. So surely animal testing is much less expensive, but their lives have more value than money. But here's your concession. I agree that ban on all testing would not work because we use it for other things. So then the qualifier should be we're banning for cosmetic testing only, and that gets us to this more refined claim. So the exception there would be medical testing. Some people feel differently about testing on animals when it might save human life versus testing on animals when it might make better shampoo or something. So again, there are other examples here of how to use that. So as a whole, the idea is this. When you are doing a policy debate, remember to be detailed and specific. You want to make sure that we understand why something's a problem or not a problem if you're on the negative side. You want us to be very clear on who's to blame, and if there are multiple parties to blame, why are you picking one, right? It's a good idea to pick one, but you'll need to justify that selection as opposed to some other possibility. Then as you make a plan, you'll want to give us steps that will, lead to the success of your plan. What do we literally need to do to act out your plan? Make sure those are logical, they follow each other. And again, if you're on the negative side, look for holes in this. Or if you need to make a counter plan, make sure you have a strong logical plan. And then, of course, the cost benefit analysis of your plan. Be honest with that. It's okay to have costs. You should have costs, but then make clear that they are still worth what we're going to lose because of what we will gain. So the benefits outweigh the costs. The other idea here, don't forget to review sort of how you can attack these arguments with refutation, with counter arguments, disadvantage focusing, those sorts of things. And you can make strong arguments if you sort of apply what we just talked about briefly with Monroe's, the Aristotelian model, or Toulmin. You can mix those up. You can, do what works best for you. But all of three of those models are effective. And so I think if you use one, you're going to make your own argument more effective than what you might just, sort of do off the cuff or, colloquially. Um, the last thing I'll add about this policy debate situation is to go back and review. I believe it is chapter 8. I want to say, let's go look. Nope. Chapter 7, Performing Persuasion. Go back and watch that as well. There's a video, there's information in here. And you'll see sort of that you want to focus on, remember, ethos, logos, and pathos. You don't want to overload us with just credibility or logic or emotion. You want to sort of make it a nice, full, and rounded argument. Don't forget persuasive appeals that you can make, just some general information. Don't only give us pros or only give us, fear appeals or positive appeals. Mix those up. Think about the emotions that we might feel. Don't forget to include yourself when you say we should do something instead of you, the audience, should do something. That feels like you're pointing, and audiences don't respond well to that. And there are other items in here that might be useful for you in terms of delivery and how you could present your argument in a way that makes it feel more persuasive to an audience or a judge. All right. I know that was sort of the crash course in policy debate, but I think what I want to do with this is give you this information, have you review it, then create your first policy debate. And of course, that is for a grade, but it's not worth as many points as the second one by design, so that you can learn as you go. But for now, those are the big things you need to focus on: is making sure that in your policy debate, you use the stock issues, you have clear organization, and that you are detailed enough for us to follow along and make your plan or counter plan happen. All right. If you have questions on this, don't hesitate to ask. As always, I'm here for you. And I think that if you have a question on something here, I'm almost positive others will too. So ask. If that happens, I'll then share it on Blackboard so that we can all gain from it, and we'll put together the pieces as we go. All right. Have a great week, and I will see you soon. And welcome back, everyone. So we are at the point in the semester now where we're going to shift our attention specifically to policy debates for the rest of the semester. Now, to me, this is really sort of the essence of debate, what it's all about. And, when we're thinking about applying debates to the real world, quote unquote, this is what we'll see the most. Usually places like Congress aren't debating if something is more important than something else. I mean, they sort of do that, but they do it in terms of taking action, with making, changing, editing policy, repealing policy even. So that is what you will also use most in your life. I mean, it could be as simple as what you and a friend or you and a partner are going to do, to a work decision. You get a work group together and you have to make a plan to cut a budget or make a presentation, that sort of thing. And so we're going to look at it in more of a theoretical way, but we will try to make some real examples that are applicable to what you might do. So let's sort of break it down. Before we jump into the course pack, let me tell you sort of what we're going to do here. First, we're going to look at the stock issues of policy debate. Remember, the stock issues are what your audience will want to know about. And so we're going to go ahead and make sure that we cover those for the policy debates. Second thing we're going to do is go to the bottom of your course pack, and we're going to sort of just walk through some policy debate elements, a couple examples, and that kind of thing. Then the last thing we're going to do, get it over here, is talk about the three models of argumentation that are in your course pack. So there is the Monroe's motivated sequence, there is Toulmin's model, and then there's the Aristotelian argument. And so we'll talk about what those are and how they apply. And we'll try to keep it as concise as possible here, so that hopefully everyone will watch the full video. Now, keep in mind, if you're thinking right now, and maybe not, maybe I won't watch this one or I'll just put it in the background. Hear me on this. You do have two policy debates that are your final projects for the class. And let me pull up the syllabus just quickly here. If we look at those policy debates, there's policy constructive, policy rebuttal, policy constructive, policy rebuttal. And so if we go down and look at those, that's 10, 20, 25, 40 points of your full grade will come from policy. So I'll say that again, so make sure everybody's clear. 40 points, 40 points of your full grade will come from upcoming policy debates. So this will be an important video for you. Stick with it. Now, let's go over to your course pack. And back where we talked about stock issues, let's just review briefly the idea of stock issues being, as I said, what an audience will want to know about your debate, no matter what the topic is. And for policy, those stock issues are on the screen. The ill, or you might call that the problem. The problem is what's going on, obviously, with the status quo. Now, it's not enough to simply say something is a problem and expect everyone to agree with you. That won't always be the case. So we'll come back and talk about what you need to do to convince an audience that something actually is a problem. The second stock issue there is blame, or who is at fault for that problem. The next is cure, or you might call that the solution, the plan, but it should be a very specific, or as specific as you can. Plan, step by step, is a plan to solve the problem described up in the ill, or the problem itself. And then last, you want to do a cost benefit analysis. So the pros and cons of the new plan, what things will look like once the plan is enacted and the problem or ill is taken care of. Okay, now if we go all the way down to the bottom of your course pack, you will see chapter 13, a closer look at policy debates. So here, this is where we're going to sort of break down your assignment. So your assignments are, one, to construct an affirmative argument, or to construct a sort of a negative argument. And so we're going to just sort of talk about all that at one time here. So this could actually say constructing the affirmative or the negative argument. And let's add to this as we go. And I'll post this on Blackboard. So constructing the affirmative or the negative argument. The first thing, and we'll take it as an affirmative first, is that you'll want to identify the problem with the status quo, the way things are, clearly, and say why it's a problem. Now, as I mentioned before, you can't just assume that everyone will agree that something is a problem because you think it is. If you think about like even global warming, right, climate change, we might think that that is something that we can all agree is a problem. And you're probably right for the most part. But think about it for just a second. Who out there, profession wise or industry wise, might think that global warming, climate change is not a problem? The fact that the earth is getting hotter is not a problem. I mean, it seems, maybe a little frivolous, but you've got people that make air conditioning, right? I mean, the folks that are going to install all those air conditioning units in, northern Michigan, when those buildings were built, they didn't have air conditioning because there was not a need for it. This is big in Europe as well. And now they're going to need these things. Hey, for them, this is a business opportunity. And again, it's not like the whole world is going to disagree with you, but you need to make sure that you're clear and that you are specific enough for an audience to see where you're coming from. And you see those next questions there. Tell the audience who is affected by the problem. So for global warming, it's all of us. But you might want to then talk about, well, how severe is it? You might say things like, well, it depends on where you live. Closer to the equator is worse than further away. But if you live in coastal areas, whether that's the sea or large lakes like us, in West Michigan, it's a huge, huge problem, right? I mean, we're going to have sea levels or lake levels rising. So make sure that you're discussing who's affected, how bad they're affected, and then the nature of that effect. So what will that cost us? And the word cost can often be seen as a negative because you'll hear people say things like, well, you can't put a price on life or liberty or whatever it might be. And that's not what this means. It can be money. So for example, if you have a beach house somewhere and the level of the water rises up until it washes out part of your foundation and your house collapses, well, that's going to cost you money, but it'll also cost you a home. Will it cost you time? Yeah, because now you've got to stop your life basically and figure out where you're going to live and what you're going to do. There's this idea of something that costs an intangible something like an item or a tangible something. So tangible just means something that you can actually put your hands on. So it could cost you your house, but if you say it also caused me to become very depressed, well, that's intangible. We can't touch that, but it's still something negative that came from this problem and it affected you. It was severe enough to affect you both physically and mentally. So that's the kind of thing that you want to do when you're describing a problem. You can go deeper than that if you want, but that's sort of the basic baseline of establishing a clear problem. Also, just to be clear, if your problem isn't something that affects everyone, that's okay, right? You can sort of limit, or I guess delimit your argument to where you could say, look, I know this isn't a problem for everyone, but for this big group of people, it is, and that's what I'm focused on right now. And you could do that as well. I mean, if you're going to talk about a problem, local to, let's say, Allendale, and you want to talk about there's a huge thing going on with the standoff in the park. I don't know if you've heard about this, but people clashing over the Confederate statue. I mean, there was a protest last weekend where people, of course, on both sides brought their guns, and it was a mess. Well, maybe you want to talk about that, but you're taking the class online and you live on, the east side of the state. Well, yeah, people over there might not care about it as much, but you could make the argument it affects them in some way. As people who are from Michigan, and this is a problem that's seen everywhere, and you're just using Allendale as the example. Or you might say, listen, I'm only talking about people in that township, but you could still go with that as your topic or your problem. The key thing is to make it clear that it is in fact a problem. Now, once you do that, the next thing you'll want to do is to blame someone or something or multiple someones or something for the problem. And by the way, right here, you'll see that my numbers and letters get a little wonky with the continuation. Sorry about that. That's just Microsoft Word having a bad day when I made this. But identify the blame. So that could again be a single person. It could be a group of people. So if we go back to global warming, we might single out an industry. We might single out like the owner of the most pollution emitting company or plant in the country or the world or whatever you want to do. But that's probably less effective for that example of climate change than it would be to say, we are all in many ways at fault. The developed world is at fault. So that might go to that number 4, multiple groups, multiple people. So, you're going to have to adjust that based on your particular problem. If we go back to the Allendale example, there's a guy, last name is Kelly, who is an official in Allendale, an official from the township, who's invited some of the militias to come to town and take part in the demonstrations. So, again, I don't know that we can only blame him, but let's say, for example, we did. That would be a fine way to go here. But if you look at number 5, it says that we have to acknowledge others, but focus on limited people or groups to blame. So, yeah, we could say that I think his name is Brian Kelly. That's what we'll call him. That might be the Notre Dame football coach. That just popped in my head. But Kelly is the problem. He's to blame for the problem because he invited the militias. Now, we can also admit that the people who come to support the presence of the militias are also part of the problem, but we're going to only focus on Mr. Kelly for this particular argument. That would work. The key to remembering here on blame is that, well, two things. One, you make it clear that this person or group or whatever is to blame in some way for the problem. You've got to make a clear connection. You can't just say, climate change is the problem and the Chinese are to blame. I mean, you need to be more specific and connect those dots for your audience. But the second thing to remember here is that when you're laying blame in this way, you can be sort of across the board blaming a variety of folks, but you want to focus your attention on one and let your audience know that you're doing that. Because if you blame one person and the audience thinks, yeah, I mean, I see your point, but there's a lot of other factors going on there, they're going to not believe much of what you say because they feel like you overlooked sort of the rest of things because you're so laser focused on blaming one person or group. So make sure for blame you're specific and you connect dots and you let the audience know if you're limiting yourself. After you establish we have a problem, you tell us who's to blame for it, then you can move on to the cure or the solution, the plan to solve your problem. Now, as you see there, this is a step by step plan, and you will need to answer a few questions. And you'll see those numbers 6 through 10 there. So here they are. How will you solve the problem in general? Are you going to take an action? Are you going to try to educate people? Are you going to change a law? Are you going to do an advertising campaign? What's your general overarching solution to the problem? Then go one step further and answer the question of what process will you use. So, if you're going to, for example, do an advertising campaign, what will you advertise? What will the message be? How will you get it out to the public? Will it be online or will it be radio, television? Will it be in newspapers? What will it look like? Are you going to try to make it negative or positive? Those sorts of questions that you'll want to really think of about beyond just I'm going to do an ad campaign. Well, specifically tell us more about it. Then answer these questions. How long will it take? It doesn't have to be exact, of course, but how long will it take to get this going? How long do we need to run these ads, do you think? The longer we run them, the more they're going to cost. So number 9, how much will it cost? And then number 10, who will pay for it? So we'll need to think about, do you want to try to get donors together? Do you want to solicit a particular group to try to get the funds that way? Do you want to pay for it yourself? You'll want to, again, give those items some thought. And before we go further with this, let me just point out here, the idea with being so detailed with all this is really two things at play. One, when you use these skills elsewhere, maybe in the workplace, for example, you're going to get questions after you make a presentation. And the more you have thought about, the better you're going to be able to answer those questions. And so that's part of it. The other part of it is in a debate setting like this, or maybe in a work setting where you're presenting your plan and then a coworker is presenting a different plan and the boss is going to decide which one that she or he wants to go with. Well, in that case, this person is probably going to try to poke holes in your plan. And if you are ready for that, you're going to be better off. So the more details you have, the stronger your argument usually is. But the way to really find out how strong your argument is that last item there, the cost benefit analysis, or evaluating your actual plan. And the key takeaway, you see it right there. Be honest about the shortcomings of your particular plan. I know it's yours and you don't want to make it look weak, and that is understandable. But if any plan, if you say there are no drawbacks, one of two things is happening. One, you're lying to us and there are drawbacks, or two, you haven't thought about it carefully enough to identify those drawbacks, but they are there. So, I would rather people tell me, okay, look, here's the downside. It's going to be expensive, or it's going to take a lot of time, or it's going to make some people mad, whatever it might be. But then show me that the benefits outweigh those costs. But I really don't want people in life or in class to say, no, it's a great plan. There's nothing that we need to worry about. It's all going to be fine. And that's it. End of the discussion. No, there's always something that needs to be identified. So with this one, the key is to be honest, but to always have more benefits than costs. Always be able to make the argument that your benefits outweigh your costs. So a classic example here where there may be more in number costs than there are benefits is the U.S. military, where the motto for some groups is leave no person behind, leave no man behind. And in that one, you can set up a debate where you have a group of people, group of soldiers, and one of them has been captured. So the commander has to make a decision. If they send their whole group of soldiers to go rescue this one person, they're likely to lose more than one soldier to save the single soldier. But they would then also be living up to their motto of leave no one behind. So, what's more important there? That's debatable. That's part of the class. And we would do that if we were together. But, on one side, the argument is it's better not to go after that person because we are going to lose one life if we don't, but we're going to save many at the same time, this rest of the soldiers. The other side of the argument is we have to go get this person because we have made the promise that we will. And even if it costs us lives, we're going to be able to stand behind that idea of leaving no one behind, that duty, honor, country, idea. And, I'm not here to tell you what's right and wrong on that one, but it goes back to something we discussed previously, and that is a hierarchy. What do you value more? Is it sort of money or safety in some of the examples we've used? But here, do you value sort of the life of the soldier more, or do you value the mentality, the promise of the military more than that? And it may be different for everyone, and that's all right. But when you come up with these costs and benefits, it's possible that you'll have more costs than benefits on paper. Rare. It's not a good sign if you do, but you definitely want to be able to explain that away as to why the limited benefits still are better than the numerous costs. Okay, now, before we go down, let's think about this from the negative side for just a moment. So if the example is, we'll say the Allendale, we'll use the Allendale example. If the problem from the affirmative side was there is a problem with racism in Allendale and it has gotten to the point of almost becoming violent. That's the problem. And we want to blame the Kelly fellow that works here. And then our solution, let's say, would be um, we need to make a rule in the township where you cannot bring weapons to public demonstrations. And the cost benefit would be, well, the cost is we're limiting the Second Amendment, but we're not taking it away. And that's been done before, so there's precedent for it. But the benefit is we're likely saving lives, and so we're putting lives above full, unfettered rights. Great. Now, on the negative side, they may see this and say, you know what, actually, there's not a problem here. This isn't a problem at all. We can come down. Let's go. It's down here somewhere. Yeah, this counter argument. We don't have a problem. This is a parking problem, but we don't have a problem in Allendale. Since this is not a problem, we don't need a solution for it. A plan, well, if we don't have a problem that we don't need to solve, we don't need a plan for it. And then if we want to do costs and benefits, we're going to keep everything the same, but we could still do that cost benefit. So let's jump back up here and see how we might play this out. Now, just like if you're saying it is a problem, you need to be specific. You also need to be specific if you say it's not. So, what you might do if you're on the negative side here is say, listen, what these folks are doing in Allendale, it rubs some people the wrong way. They're not comfortable seeing armed individuals in a field. It feels like, a war is about to happen. However, these people are simply exercising their Second Amendment rights. They're exercising their First Amendment rights as well. And, we can't take that away from them. And so far, no one's been hurt. We haven't seen any real violence. And so it's not a problem. We can continue to let them peacefully, though with weapons seen, which is open carry, and that's legal in Michigan, continue to let them do what they're doing. Now, the blame for this being seen as a problem could be, I don't know, I'd imagine they would blame the media who blows this out of proportion, or the counter protesters who don't like weapons and so they think that anyone with them must be evil. And so my plan here, we don't need to solve the problem because there's not one. However, we should probably educate people on the First and Second Amendment so that they understand this isn't a threat to their well-being. This is a demonstration of their well-being in America. And the costs and benefits means that, we haven't seen any real violence yet. And it's possible that we might, but we might see that anywhere at any time for any reason. So while that is one of the costs, we're really in a better position to continue to allow these weapons at these demonstrations because rights are more important than hypothetical violence. And that's what we have here since there's no real violence yet. Right? So that's sort of the approach that you might take if you're on the negative side. It's just the opposite. And when you talk about there's a problem with something, the counter argument, or I guess the negative side to be more specific, would say either this is not a problem, in fact, or they could change some other part here. They might say, you know what, it is sort of a problem that we have this. However, the blame for this Allendale unrest should be the NRA, because they have pushed gun rights to the point where people feel emboldened enough to bring them to these small town debates and sort of naturally threaten other people because they have them. And so we don't need to take away this ability to come and protest with weapons, but we need to bring down the temperature a little. And so here's my plan to do that, whatever that might look like. And then you could say, look, my plan's great because it lets us keep our rights and use our rights. However, it also brings down the level of potential violence to where it's much more manageable. And the cost is that neither side's going to be fully happy with it, but it's better because it's safe. So again, there's no really right or wrong way in terms of what you see as the best idea for a plan. It's just that making sure you can back it up is so crucial. Okay, so we've sort of done the affirmative and the negative constructives. Now, let's go back and think about how we might respond to these. Here, you'll see countering the affirmative. And again, it could be countering the negative just the same. But you'll want to select one or more elements to really go after. So, it could be the problem that, it either is or is not a problem. And you're just going to then extend your original argument. Because if one says it is a problem, the other says it's not, well, you've already made the arguments on your side. So you'll want to go back and look at the reasons why the other side said it was or was not a problem and, go after those. So if the affirmative side said that, there is this potential for violence. Okay, if you're on the negative, all you say is, yeah, but there hasn't been violence yet in Allendale, so that's hypothetical. It doesn't really count. While on the other side, if they said this isn't a problem because there hasn't yet been violence, then if you're on the affirmative, you simply come back and say, my opponent thinks that hypothetical violence is only hypothetical and everything is only hypothetical until it happens, but then it's too late. So we need to be proactive. And there's your counter, right? Same idea with the rest of these. The blame, was the wrong person blamed? Was it incomplete? the cure, point out specific errors or shortcomings of their plan, does it really solve the problem if we do some of these things? Maybe, maybe not. Now, again, this will be so individualized based on the arguments that you make, because now we're responding directly to those arguments, and they're all going to be different. But you will want to be as specific as possible. You might say things like, let's assume that you are right and that this was a problem or is a problem. Well, that's still not the whole picture. And so now you can go after something very specific. And of course, the cost and benefit analysis. If you feel like their cost benefit analysis wasn't complete, go ahead and tell them that, and then show them where it's not complete. Show them where maybe some of their benefits are actually costs. Where you might say, well, we're going to keep people safe because we think that safety is more important than rights. Can you imagine just coming back on that and being like, yeah, safety more important than rights? Huh? What do you think the founding fathers would say about that? Do you think that they would say, yeah, well, we'd like to fight the Revolutionary War, but I'd rather stay safe? That sort of stuff is maybe a little over the top, but it will get your point across to an audience. And that's what really matters here, because you're still making a logical argument. You're just using a sort of a grand example to make that point.